All right, let's talk shot placement on bears. All right, so over to the big screen here. This is a great depiction of the anatomy of a bear. Okay, so what looks different between this and the animals we're used to hunting, or the animals the majority of us are hunting, deer and elk? Let me show you a couple hanging carcasses to kind of depict the difference. So this is an elk, right, or red deer. You can see here, this animal is hanging. So this is the top of the back strap. This is the widest part of the chest, right? The widest part of the diaphragm is right here. If you imagine this leg kind of sitting back in here, the crease that a lot of folks shoot at on these animals is right here. It's actually pretty close to the depth of the chest on these animals, all right? Now let's look at a bear. This is a bear that a client of ours shot, and this is right here, you guys might know, this is James Nash. He's taking the meat off the ribs of this bear. Now look at this bear. The shoulder's been removed, but the shoulder's right here, and the crease that I referenced on the other animals is right here, right? You can see that that's actually not even close to the depth of the chest. The depth of the chest, the depth of the diaphragm is like a foot further back than that, right? It's back here, right? So that's what you're seeing on this. You're seeing the shift of the diaphragm from up here back, right? Like let's look at an elk. Sorry, bear with me here. If you look at an elk right here, you can see like the scapula, a lot of that lung is right up against that scapula, pretty much under it, right against that knuckle, right? The dreaded knuckle that we don't want to hit with our arrows. But anyways, a lot of that diaphragm is up there underneath that. On a bear, it's really not. You know what I mean? This is obviously is an exaggeration because the bear's got its front leg forward, but a lot of that diaphragm's further back. So the first point is you want to shoot that bear a little bit further back, right? A lot of guys will say center, right? So nose, tail, dead center. I personally think that that's a little bit of an exaggeration, right? So center would be, right here pretty much. I think you kind of want to be more like 35, 40%, right? So right in here is probably the spot, right? So, 6 inches back from the crease, 8 inches back, 9 inches back from the crease on a good sized bear, right? So a little bit forward of center is what I would say. All right. Now, the next thing we want to look at bears is center up top to bottom, right? So here. There's a lot of times you hear on bears center, and what they're saying is center this way and then center this way, right? So just crosshairs, boom, just broadside bear, quarter him, right? Quarter in each quadrant of your crosshairs. On this one, from top to bottom, I agree with it. And the reason is, particularly in the spring, the reason is that bears have a bunch of belly hair, right? So deer and elk do not have hair that is that long hanging off of their brisket and their belly, right? This long. I've seen, this is like 8 inches, right? I've seen that on spring bears. It's not uncommon, 6 to 8 inches of hair. So the problem that you run into is if you're shooting, you're trying to heart shoot them, right? You're going to heart shoot them right in here, right? You're going to go right at the crease and clip the top of that heart. If you do that, a lot of times you don't realize that there's a bunch of hair there. And if you miss just a smidge below where you're aiming, you're just going to, slice through the hair, cut their brisket open. It's going to be a non-fatal shot. So you want to shoot a little bit higher, and really, it's center. From top to bottom, it's center of the bear, right? Don't get down in that pocket or you're going to cause yourself issues, right? So we've kind of covered this all from maybe a little bit of a firearm-centric point of view. So I'll talk about archery a little bit here. But before I get to that, because I'm going to say some things in that discussion that might be a little controversial, bears are not tough. I think people associate them to being predators, and therefore, there is a little safety risk around them, those sort of things. So therefore, they're very tough. Bears are not tough at all. One of the easiest animals to kill, in my opinion. They're pretty thin-skinned. They don't have a ton of bone structure that's like devastatingly, painful to penetrate, right? Look at their shoulder compared to an elk. All right, guys, my Spring Bear online course is up on the website at pursuitwithcliff.com/Spring Bear. I've taken all of my knowledge, everything I've learned on over 50 successful spring bear hunts across the states and across Canada. All of that I've shoved into this course. Right now, there's already 6 or 7 hours up, and I'm going to continually improve this course. Once you sign up, you'll have access forever. All of the information and the full course will be complete by the first week of April. There's a ton of knowledge, a ton of tactics, a ton of gear talk that's going to help anybody who's preparing for a spring hunt. Go check it out. Look at that, like the shoulder here, that scapula ridge, right? That big knuckle, that big ball joint on them. Bears really don't have that. It's all smaller, and it's actually not as big structurally either. The bone that is problematic on bears can be their skull. And a lot of that is, yes, it's the heft of the skull, but it's also the curvature, right? If you're shooting a grizzly coming right at you, the chances of you penetrating that curvature goes way down just because a bullet can skip around it, right? It's kind of like what you hear with the helmet, right? A lot of guys get hit in the helmet in the military. Somebody shoots them. You think the guy'd be deader than dead. Turns out like it didn't even penetrate the helmet. The guy's perfectly fine because it hits it and just kind of skims around and goes around, you know. So there's that element that comes into play, and I think that's kind of where sometimes this toughness thing comes in with bears, because grizzlies and brown bears, particularly for their size, I don't view them as big, strong, you know, hard to kill animals either. So having, you know, giving you that information on rifles, quartering to, quartering away, broadside, frontal, all money. If you're within, you know, your capabilities, if you're within yardages that the velocity at impact is going to be high enough for that bullet to upset and have good terminal performance, then all of those positions are good, right? Basically, don't shoot them in the ass when they're running away from you, right? That's pretty much what you're limited to on rifles. All those other angles, if you're cognizant of this anatomy, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to put the bullet through both lungs. There's nothing in there that's going to stop you. On archery stuff, you know, broadside's best, but I would, broadside quartering away is best to get both of those lungs. But I will say that a quartering, you know, frontal, you gotta be careful with the frontal with a bow, because a lot of times bears have their head down, right? To hit that frontal that we think about on elk or whatever, it's a little bit different because you don't see bears, you know, standing, you know, holding their head up much. If they stand up, then you can do that. But you have to hit the same vascular area, right? Because otherwise, if you shoot a bear standing up with a bow, a lot of times you're just going to single lung them if you shoot for the chest, right? If you don't hit all that good vascular stuff, you could be in for a long tracking job if that's the case. So you got to aim a little bit higher where all the, you know, the heart and all of the big arteries and veins going in and out of the lungs are at. That's where you're going to do your damage. Now, but the position I wanted to talk about, because quartering away is good, we know that, slip it in there, hit both lungs. But the quartering to shot, a shot that we really don't like to make with elk, on bears, with archery equipment, it's a little more forgiving. I'm not saying take an extreme quartering to just because it's hard to do it. But if you got a little quartering to, just realize that this fact that the diaphragm is shifted back on bears, it helps you out some. Because the problem with elk, when you look at an elk, the problem with the quartering to shot is, in order to get it behind that knuckle, behind this big arch on the scapula, you've got to aim quite a bit further back, right? Because you're at an angle, and so the arrow's gonna penetrate. You don't want to penetrate up in here, or you're in here. You want to penetrate right here, right in the first third of that lung, and then get those other lungs on the other side. The problem is, in order to avoid this, you know, the bone structure up here, a lot of times you're gonna miss that lung on the far side, and that's why it's kind of like a huge trap when you're shooting archery at bulls that are quartering to you, right? Because of that dynamic. Now, if you take those lungs and you shift them back, it's a little bit better, because now we can shoot behind that front leg, behind that scapula, and we can get both lungs, because now we're entering like the front quarter of the lungs or whatever, right? And our arrow is gonna exit through that far lung. We're gonna have a dead bear. So not an extreme case, but a little quartering to, I think, is a perfectly ethical shot. Obviously, depending on the yardage, all of that. Main thing is just visualize this anatomy, archery or rifle, and you're gonna be a lot happier with the outcome. So that's bear anatomy, shot placement, all that good stuff.